The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of pine needles and expensive perfume, a suffocating combination that clung to the back of Chloe's throat. For 6 hours, she had navigated this glittering jungle of silk and diamonds, her smile a fixed, polite mask. Her white shirt was crisp, her red vest immaculate, and her black trousers were practical, allowing her to move like a shadow between tables laden with half-empty champagne flutes and discarded canapés. It was Christmas Eve at the Grand Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, and she was just another part of the scenery, invisible and efficient. She was clearing a table near the towering, frosted windows when she first felt his gaze. It wasn't the usual drunken, appreciative glance from a businessman. This was different. It was heavy, a physical weight against her skin. She didn't look up, focusing on the delicate task of stacking crystal glasses without a single clink. Her movements were economical, born of long shifts and the desperate need to keep this job. But the feeling persisted. A cold, deliberate attention that cut through the festive noise. When she finally straightened, her tray balanced perfectly on one hand, she allowed her eyes to sweep the room. And there he was. He was sitting alone at a table meant for 6, a bottle of what looked like Yamazaki whiskey nearly empty before him. The other men who had flanked him earlier, all sharp suits and sharper eyes, had melted away, leaving him in a pool of self-imposed solitude. He wasn't classically handsome in the way of the actors on the city's giant screens. His face was all harsh angles and shadows, his black hair falling slightly over a brow that was set in a permanent, thoughtful scowl. But it was the suit that held her attention first. It was a dark charcoal, tailored so precisely it seemed less like fabric and more like a second skin, a layer of impeccable armor. And beneath the starched white cuff of his shirt, just at the wrist, was a flash of intricate, dark blue ink, the coiled tail of a dragon. That was when she knew. She had been in Tokyo long enough to recognize the signs, the quiet deference he commanded without raising his voice, the way even the hotel manager gave his table a wide, respectful berth. He was Yakuza. Chloe turned away, her heart giving a single, hard thump against her ribs. Her job was to be invisible. Her life depended on it. She moved toward the kitchens, the weight of his stare following her every step. She told herself it was nothing. A powerful man, drunk and bored on a holiday, he clearly had no interest in celebrating. She made 2 more trips, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, her body on autopilot while her mind raced. The party was thinning out. Laughter grew louder, less controlled. The orchestra had packed up, replaced by a soft, generic holiday playlist. Finally, her shift was over. She just had to make it to the employee exit without drawing any more attention. She was untying her apron in the service corridor when a low voice stopped her. Waitress. The word was not a request. It was a summons. Chloe froze, her back to the ballroom doors. She turned slowly, her face carefully neutral. He was standing there, having moved from his table with a silence that was unnerving. Up close, he was taller than she'd thought, broad-shouldered and imposing. The smell of whiskey and something else, sandalwood and smoke, rolled off him in a subtle wave. His eyes, dark and intelligent, were not as drunk as she'd assumed. They were sharp, focused entirely on her. "Yes, sir?" she asked, her voice steady. He took a step closer. The space between them became charged, electric. "They say it's Christmas," he said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured vaguely toward the glittering decorations. "A time for miracles and charity." Chloe said nothing. She kept her hands clasped behind her back, a posture of professional deference that hid the tremor in her fingers. He studied her face, his gaze lingering on her eyes, her mouth. "I have a challenge for you. A charitable act." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick wad of yen, held together by a simple gold clip. He didn't count it. He didn't need to. It was more money than she made in 3 months. "Walk me home," he said. Chloe stared at him. Of all the things she had expected, this was not it. "Sir, I can call you a taxi. The hotel has a private car service." "No," he cut her off, the single word absolute.
No cars.
No drivers. You will walk me home. It was insane.
A test. A game.
A whim of a dangerous man who was used to getting whatever he wanted. Walking through the streets of Shinjuku late on Christmas Eve with a man who bled power and violence was a special kind of suicide. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to run, to disappear back into the anonymity she cultivated so carefully. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. A flicker of something, not amusement, something colder, passed through his eyes. Because no one else will. Because my men would carry me, and my enemies would kill me. But you, he paused, his gaze sweeping over her simple uniform. You're nothing. A ghost. The perfect escort. He tossed the wad of cash onto a nearby service tray. It landed with a soft, heavy thud. That is for your time. The challenge is to see if you have the courage to take it. She looked from the money to his face. He was goading her, expecting her to scuttle away, frightened. And she was frightened. But she was also tired. Tired of being broke, of being invisible, of being afraid. Something defiant and reckless sparked within her. She met his gaze, holding it for a long, silent moment. All right, she said, her voice clear and firm. I'll walk you home. She picked up the money, her movements deliberate, and tucked it into the deep pocket of her trousers. He watched her, a slow, predatory smile just touching the corner of his mouth. It was not a warm expression. It was the look of a man who had just claimed a new, interesting possession. That was the moment everything changed. She had stepped out of the role of the invisible waitress and into something else, something terrifying and unknown. He led her out of the hotel, not through the grand lobby, but through a private side exit that opened onto a quiet, snow-dusted street. The cold air was a shock, sharp and clean after the stuffy ballroom. He did not offer her his arm. He simply started walking, expecting her to follow. And she did, falling into step just beside him. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the unspoken rules of the game he had started. For a few blocks, the city was peaceful, decorated with festive lights that cast a gentle glow on the falling snow. He walked with a steady, measured pace, the alcohol seeming to have little effect on his balance. Then she saw it. A black sedan, its headlights off, was parked halfway down the block. As they passed, it pulled silently from the curb, keeping a careful distance behind them. Chloe's breath hitched. Don't look back, he murmured, his voice so low she almost didn't hear it. They have been waiting since I arrived at the hotel. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't a drunken whim. This was a calculated risk. He was using her, a foreign waitress, a nobody, who would look twice at them. He was using her as camouflage. The anger that flared in her was hot and sharp, but it was quickly extinguished by a new, more potent wave of fear. The stakes of his challenge were suddenly, terrifyingly real. The money in her pocket felt like a stone, dragging her down into his world. The hook was in, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he would not be letting her go until he was home. Or until one of them was dead. The leisurely walk became a tense, strategic movement through the neon-drenched canyons of Shinjuku. Tatsuya, he had told her his name with the same blunt finality as his challenge, moved with a purpose that belied his supposed intoxication. He was not stumbling. He was navigating. He guided her with a light, almost imperceptible pressure on her elbow, turning them down narrower streets, through crowded arcades buzzing with late-night revelers, and into the labyrinthine alleys that crisscrossed the district like a spiderweb. The black sedan was persistent. Chloe caught glimpses of it in the reflection of shop windows, a dark shark gliding through a sea of light. Another car had joined it. They were being herded. They want to isolate me, Tatsuya said, his voice a low vibration near her ear. He had leaned in closer, the pretense of distance gone. Now, their proximity was a necessity. Away from witnesses. What do you want me to do? Chloe asked, her own voice tight but even. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. She was a participant now, not just an observer. He glanced down at her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. He had expected fear, maybe tears. He had not expected a calm, practical question. When I move, you move. Do not hesitate. Do not scream. Understand? She nodded, her gaze fixed forward. The air grew colder, the alleys darker. The festive sounds of the main streets faded, replaced by the drip of water from overhead pipes and the distant wail of a siren. He pulled her to a stop in the shadow of a dumpster. The alley was a dead end, a brick wall rising up in front of them. Behind them, the sounds of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, grew closer. This was it, the trap. For a heartbeat, Chloe's survival instinct screamed at her to run, to leave him, to save herself. He was the target, not her. She could shove him toward the approaching men and disappear into the night. He would be a diversion. But she looked at his face, illuminated by the red glow of a neon sign from the street beyond. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a stillness, a lethal calm she had only ever seen in predators. He was not afraid. He was waiting. He pushed her gently but firmly against the cold brick wall, stepping in front of her. His body was a shield. The sandalwood and whiskey scent of him filled her senses, overwhelming the foul smell of the alley. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Two men appeared at the mouth of the alley, their forms silhouetted against the streetlights. They were large, dressed in dark coats, their intentions radiating from them like a physical force. They were not here to talk. Tatsuya did not speak. He simply shrugged his shoulders, a small, almost casual movement. But in that motion, his tailored jacket shifted, and Chloe saw the glint of steel as a short, wicked-looking blade appeared in his hand as if from nowhere. He moved before they could. It was not a brawl. It was a piece of brutal, silent choreography. He flowed forward, a shadow detaching from the darkness. There was a sickening, wet thud, a choked gasp. One man went down. The other lunged, a knife of his own flashing. Tatsuya moved like water around a stone. A block, a twist, a pivot. His movements were surgical, economical, and utterly ruthless. Chloe watched, frozen, as he disarmed the second man and drove his own blade home. The man crumpled to the ground without a sound. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the sound of Tatsuya's breathing, harsh in the cold air. He stood over the two bodies, his back to her. He did not look at them. He was looking at his hand, at the blood that coated his knuckles and dripped from the blade. That is when she saw it. A deep gash on his left forearm, just below the elbow, bleeding sluggishly through the torn fabric of his expensive suit. He had been cut. He turned to her then. His eyes were black pits, devoid of emotion. He was waiting for her to scream, to run. It was the moment she could have escaped. The path was clear, but she didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the blood dripping onto the grimy pavement. She thought of her meager first aid kit in her purse, the antiseptic wipes and bandages she always carried for kitchen cuts and burns. She made a choice. Without a word, she pushed herself off the wall. She walked toward him, her step steady. She reached into her purse, her fingers finding the small kit. He watched her, his expression unreadable, his body tensed as if expecting an attack. She stopped in front of him, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She looked from the wound on his arm to his eyes. "Give me your arm," she said. Her voice did not shake. He stared at her, his mind clearly struggling to process her reaction. He was a monster, a killer, and she was offering him aid. Slowly, as if testing a wild animal, he extended his injured arm. Chloe took it, her touch gentle. She ripped open an antiseptic wipe with her teeth and began to clean the wound, her movements deft and practiced. The cut was deep, but clean. It would need stitches. For now, all she could do was clean it and wrap it. He stood perfectly still, allowing her to tend to him, his gaze never leaving her face. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. In the middle of a dark alley, surrounded by violence and death, she was tending to his wound as if they were in a quiet room. He flinched slightly when the antiseptic stung the raw flesh. It was the first sign of vulnerability she had seen from him, a crack in the cold, impenetrable armor. In that moment, he wasn't just the Yakuza boss. He was a man, bleeding in the dark. She finished wrapping the bandage, pulling it tight. Her fingers brushed against the dragon tattoo, the skin warm and smooth beneath the ink. A current passed between them, a spark of awareness that had nothing to do with the danger and everything to do with the simple, profound act of one human touching another. She let go of his arm and looked up at him. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He smelled of blood now, a metallic tang beneath the whiskey and sandalwood.
"Thank you," he said.
The words sounded foreign on his tongue, as if he rarely used them. She just nodded. The choice was made. She had not run. She had stayed. She had helped him. She had crossed a line, and she knew, with a terrifying clarity, that there was no going back. The walk home wasn't over. It was just beginning. They didn't speak again as they left the alley, leaving the two bodies behind in the shadows as if they were nothing more than discarded trash. Tatsuya moved with the same lethal grace, but he stayed closer to her now, his side occasionally brushing against hers. The city felt different, its festive lights now seeming garish and hollow. The world Chloe had known just an hour ago, a world of tips, sore feet, and rent payments, had ceased to exist. In its place was this new reality of silent violence and unspoken debts. His home was not a house, but a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a sleek, anonymous skyscraper in West Shinjuku. The elevator opened directly into the living space, a vast expanse of polished black marble, glass, and steel. It was breathtakingly minimalist and aggressively masculine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Tokyo, a glittering carpet of light stretching to the horizon. But there was no art on the walls, no photos, no books. There was no Christmas tree. The place was as cold and empty as a tomb. A man was waiting for them. He was older, with a face like a roadmap of old scars, and he bowed low when Tatsuya entered. He took in the scene, Tatsuya's torn and bloodied sleeve, Chloe's presence, her cheap uniform a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings, with a single, sweeping glance that missed nothing. His gaze lingered on Chloe for a moment, not with suspicion, but with a kind of weary curiosity. "Master Tatsuya," the man said, his voice a gravelly whisper. The Hashimoto clan sent a message. He gestured to a low-slung leather sofa. Another of Tatsuya's men was laid out on it, his face a swollen, bruised mess. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. Tatsuya's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He went to his man's side, his movements efficient as he checked his pulse, his injuries. "Get the doctor." "Now," he snapped at the older man, who bowed again and disappeared into another room. Chloe stood awkwardly by the elevator, feeling utterly out of place. This was his world, a place of brutal consequences. She should leave. Now was her chance. She could press the button, descend back to the street, and melt back into her own life. She could forget this night ever happened. But her feet felt rooted to the marble floor. She watched Tatsuya as he gently cleaned a cut on his fallen soldier's forehead with a cloth the older man had left. There was a focused tenderness in the gesture that seemed completely at odds with the killer she had seen in the alley. He was a protector of his own, and his failure to protect this man was written in the tense line of his jaw. That is when she made her second mistake of the night, a choice far more binding than the first. She walked over to the bar, a long slab of black granite, found a bottle of antiseptic and clean cloths, and returned to the sofa. She knelt on the floor opposite Tatsuya. He looked up, his eyes questioning. "I can help," she said simply. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a single, curt nod. Together, in silence, they worked on the injured man. She cleaned the smaller cuts while Tatsuya examined a more serious wound on his ribs. She was no nurse, but she was competent, her hands steady. She was aware of him, of his proximity, the way his knuckles brushed hers as they reached for the same cloth. He smelled of soap now, He must have washed the blood from his hands before she noticed. The scent of sandalwood remained, a constant anchor in the surreal situation. She was helping a crime boss clean up his battered soldier in a multi-million-dollar penthouse. The absurdity of it all was a distant hum beneath the urgent reality of the moment. The doctor arrived, a quiet, efficient man who asked no questions. As he took over, Tatsuya stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. Chloe retreated to the far side of the room, giving them space. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling the chill of the cavernous apartment. She did something she knew was morally gray. She lied. When the older man, whose name she learned was Ito, offered her a cup of tea and asked how she came to be with his master, she did not say she was a waitress he'd hired on a whim. "I'm a friend," she heard herself say. The lie was smooth, easy. It felt like a key turning in a lock. It defined her place here for now. It made her part of the circle, an accomplice. She could not uncross that line. The tension in the room was a living thing. A phone call was made. Voices were kept low, urgent. The name, Hashimoto, was repeated like a curse. Chloe understood. A rival family. A power play on Christmas Eve, when defenses were thought to be down. Later, after the doctor had stabilized the injured man and departed as silently as he'd arrived, Tatsuya approached her. He held out a glass of water. "You should have run," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. "You didn't give me much of a choice," she replied, taking the glass. Her fingers brushed his. The contact was electric. "I gave you one in the alley. You stayed," he paused, his gaze intense. "Everyone else runs. Your boss at the hotel, the men who were with me tonight. They run. They hide. You did not." It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous, far more honest. It was a confession of his isolation and an acknowledgement of her strange, unexplainable courage. It was a bond forged in blood and fear. She had been seen, truly seen by him, not as a waitress, not as a ghost, but as someone who did not run. She was about to reply when a tiny, bright red appeared on the wall behind him. It danced for a second before moving, sweeping across the polished floor. Chloe's blood turned to ice. She knew what it was. A laser sight that moved with terrifying speed, climbing up Tatsuya's back. He was oblivious, his attention focused entirely on her. It was going for his head. Without thinking, she acted. She threw the glass of water in his face. The shock of the cold water made him stagger back a half step. In that same instant, the red dot landed on the spot where his heart had been. And then the window behind him exploded inward, a deafening crack that echoed like a thunderclap. Tatsuya reacted instantly. He lunged, not away from the danger, but toward her. He tackled her to the floor, his body a dead weight, shielding her from the shower of glass. Shards rained down around them, tinkling like deadly chimes on the marble. The enemy had not just made a move against him. They had targeted her. The sniper had seen him speaking to her, had seen the intensity between them, and had decided she was the target. Or perhaps the bait. Either way, they had made it personal. The war was no longer just his. It was theirs.